Is religion to blame for the world's violence, or is it just an easy scapegoat? And in a world of advanced science and technology, do we even need religion anymore? In this UpFront special, we'll debate faith, reason, Islam and science with physicist and atheist Lawrence Krauss and Reza Aslan, author of the new book, God, A Human History. Is religion a force for good or evil? A controversial question, I know, but one you just can't avoid in the modern world. From violence and terror to gender equality to science, reason and education, the faithful and the faithless tend to repeatedly clash over whether religion is a net positive or negative, whether it helps humanity more than it hurts it. Joining me today to debate all this on a special edition of the show are Reza Aslan, a scholar of religion and best-selling author. He just released his latest book, God, A Human History. And from Chicago, Lawrence Krauss, a theoretical physicist, atheist and best-selling author of numerous books on science, including his latest offering, The Greatest Story Ever Told So Far. Thank you both for joining me on UpFront. Reza, let's start with you. You've got a new book out, God, A Human History. You're a Muslim, you're an academic, someone who studies religions up close and personal. What conclusions have you arrived at over your life and your career, dare I say, over whether religion is a force for good or evil, a positive or a negative?
It's both. I mean, religion is both a force of good and evil because religion is a man-made institution and human beings are both good and evil. And so I don't know why it would come as a surprise to learn that the religious institutions that we create can also be responsible for profound acts of good and compassion and positivity, and for equally profound acts of violence and bigotry and hatred.
But you're a believer. You as a person.
I believe in God, yes.
Yeah, so belief, if a world without belief, a world without faith, let's put organized religion perhaps to one side, would that be a better world? There's a lot of people who say if there was no religion, the world would be a better place. Is that a view you share?
Well, whether it would be a better or a worse place is in some ways irrelevant because of the fact that faith is deeply embedded in our cognitive processes. It's a part of who we are. It's a mode of knowing. It's an emotion. It's an emotion like any other emotion. It's not rational, it's experiential. To say that we could simply remove faith from society, I think, is to misunderstand what faith actually is.
Lawrence Krauss, you're an outspoken writer on this issue. You're an atheist yourself. Not all atheists have a negative view of religion, but the new atheists, and some would put you in that camp, are often seen as anti-faith, hostile to faith. Do you believe that a world without religion would be a better place?
Well, first of all, let me say, I hate this term new atheists. I don't know what it is. Atheists have been not believing for as long as atheists have not been believing. So this new and old thing is just some acronym that makes no sense. But look, I think the world would be better if we accepted reality for what it is. I have to say that I don't disagree with most of what Reza said. Religion is a man-made institution. But what I disagree with was when he said we impose upon the divine. He's assuming there's a divine, but it's a man-made institution. The other thing that I guess I might disagree with is that when he said it's a way of knowing, it's not a way of knowing. The only way of knowing is to test the world, and the scientific method is the way to learn about the world. Revelation has never revealed anything true about the world. But whether religion, if we look at the history of things, he's absolutely right. Religion has done good things, religion has done bad things. One of my favorite lines comes from a colleague of mine, a physicist, Steven Weinberg, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, who said there are good people and there are bad people. Good people do good things, bad people do bad things. When good people do bad things, it's religion.
Is there a sense that in 2017, with all the science, you're a scientist, with all the science, technology, education we have now, is it your contention that we have or should have outgrown religion?
Well, I was surprised by that. When I was a young person, I thought by now we would have outgrown religion because, let's face it, the evidence of science is that there's no evidence for anything, for any purpose to the universe, any divine inspiration. There's no evidence, and therefore
that's not true.
It is surprising. And if you look at the first world, at least, it is true that whatever the noise that's happening in Congress or the president or anything else, the number of people who define themselves as having a given religious faith has been decreasing monotonically over the last 30 or 40 years. And most people, and I think maybe Reza will agree with this, most people who define themselves as religious actually don't buy any of the doctrines of their, quote, religion. They just like to think of themselves as good people. In fact, my friend Richard Dawkins' foundation did a study of people who declared themselves as Christian in England after a census, and most of them said exactly that. Religion has usurped morality. And my big problem with religion, if I have one, is that, and I get letters every day from people who say, I feel like a bad person because I question the existence of God. And the people around me make me feel like a bad person because religion has usurped morality. And if you just say, look, I don't accept it, you're viewed as a bad person. And I think both Reza and I would agree that's not true.
Certainly not true. In fact, poll after poll shows that the most moral community in the United States is atheists. But I do think that both Lawrence and I, being professors and academics, need to do something first and foremost before we can continue this conversation, and that is define our terms. Because first of all, we're not talking about religion. We're talking about faith, and those are two separate things. We can have a conversation about whether it's right for people to replace scientific fact with mythologies and legends. Of course it's not. But I do think that it's important to understand that that's not where the debate lies. The debate lies in something more fundamental with something that Lawrence said, and that's that science has proven that there is nothing beyond the material realm. Well, no, science hasn't proven
I never said that.
No
science
purpose.
hasn't proven it.
There's no
evidence.
There's no purpose, right. What science has shown is that we don't know whether there is any kind of purpose, but there hasn't been any evidence that there is purpose. But of course, that doesn't mean that
and it isn't particularly useful. In fact, I'm not an anti-theist, and I think many, quote, new atheists are not atheists. What, if anything, I'm an apatheist because religion never comes into the question.
The language we often hear in this debate is we hear about religious fundamentalists, bad, religious moderates, good. Well, maybe they're not good either. I'm just wondering, first of all, Reza, do you identify with either of those terms? And how would you unpack? Do you see a distinction between moderates and fundamentalists? We hear a lot about fundamentalism.
Well, look, fundamentalism is a term that was created about 120 years ago, very specifically to speak about a movement within American Protestant Christianity that, in response to the scientific revolution and the sort of definition of truth being that which can be factually verified, and the response to that was to say, well, if truth is only that which can be factually verified, then the only way Scripture can be true is if it can be factually verified, if it's literal. And so there we get the terms literalism, fundamentalism. Nowadays, when we use the term fundamentalism, what we mean is sort of ultra-conservative expressions of religiosity that is dependent upon a literalist reading of text. That actually, believe it or not, despite I think what most people assume, is a minority opinion about religion. Lawrence is absolutely right. Many, in fact, I would say the majority of religious people do not take their religious doctrines, completely to heart. And in fact, the Pew Forum of Religion and Public Life discovered that anywhere between 10 and 12% of self-described atheists in America actually believe in God. So this is an important point to keep in mind.
Do we call the religious believers who are not literalists, do we call them moderates? Do you identify yourself as a moderate?
No, I mean, words like moderate and literalists and fundamentalists unfortunately have lost a lot of meaning because of the way that they get thrown around as pejoratives, as value judgments. I'm a person of faith. I have an experiential understanding of the universe.
What experience? That's what amazes me, because what you just said, it seems to me, is an oxymoron. Faith involves believing things for which there's no evidence, and then you tell me you have an experiential. Science is an experiential understanding of the universe. Faith is most certainly exactly the opposite, which is why most scientists aren't people. Let me just say, the point is that most scientists are atheists, and most atheists are atheists simply because God is irrelevant. God is redundant. I've been a scientist for 40 years. I've never heard the word mentioned in a scientific meeting. We don't need the idea to understand the universe. So maybe you can have faith in a divine purpose to the universe, but it doesn't help us understand anything about the way the universe actually works. So So I don't care about it.
Lawrence, on that note, I mean, you mentioned science. Obviously, I think you're right. The surveys do show a majority of scientists are atheists, but that doesn't change the fact that a lot of prominent scientists are believers in God who have done a lot of great work in the fields of science.
As I like to say, there are some scientists who are Republicans. People aren't always rational.
Okay. But here's my question on that note about the religious folks, because I mentioned fundamentalism. Is your problem as an atheist with the religious fundamentalists, who kind of Reza outlined, who he says are a minority, or is it with all religious folks? Because a lot of prominent atheists have come out and said that moderates are worse than fundamentalists because they act as apologists for the fundamentalists. They act as cover for the fundamentalists. What's your position?
I don't like labels either, as well as Reza. I think the point is, my problem with religion is I generally think that fundamentalism or not, that religious institutions have not only usurped the notion of morality, but on the whole, promulgate ideas that are not useful and often harmful for people, and take many people, many people who simply want to ask questions about the universe and make them feel bad, and moreover elevate certain ideas as sacred and without question. And there should be nothing sacred in a democratic society.
True.
Everything should be subject to question and ridicule, from religion to sex to politics.
And science.
Okay.
And what I would say, just to...
And science,
Yeah.
but that's what science is based on. We all question each other. We don't wear robes and agree to...
You didn't quite answer my question, which is, when I say to you kind of religious folks in general, religious people in general, do you see them as less culpable for the kind of sins or crimes that you ascribe to religion, or do you see them as just as bad as everyone else, as the quote-unquote fundamentalists, literalists, extremists, whatever word you want to give? I'm just trying to nail down what you think of religious people as a whole.
The point is, you think I'm complaining about people. I'm not complaining about people. I'm complaining about ideas. There's a very different thing.
I get that.
There
with
are
respect, but
wonderful
my question is
religious
about
people. There are crappy religious people.
My question about people.
Oh, look, you can't generalize.
Okay.
I don't think you can generalize. Individuals act in a certain way, and as I say, we all believe 10 impossible things before breakfast just to get you believe you love your wife, or you love your job, or you love coming on this program, or whatever it is.
I'm sure you both love that.
And I do, and I really do. But what I'm saying is that, I think to generalize about people because of how they identify themselves is kind of naive and facile.
You say naive and facile. Just to be clear, I'm only mentioning it because a lot of prominent atheists, new atheists, I know you don't like that phrase, have in fact attacked people and said moderates, so-called moderates, are apologists for the extremists. So I'm just checking.
I spent a lot of time with my friend Richard Dawkins.
I don't want to put any words in your mouth.
I think you're putting people. I think you're putting words in people's mouths. I know my friend Richard Dawkins takes.
No. Your friend Richard Dawkins. Sorry, Lawrence. Richard Dawkins said, and I quote, in 2014,
I know
there is a sense in which the moderate, nice religious people, nice Christians, nice Muslims, make the world safe for extremists. Is that your view?
There is a sense in which it's true. There's a sense in which it's not true, too. But there's a sense by accepting this nonsense, this doctrinal nonsense, and by refusing to say, look, I have faith, but you know what? When someone blew a horn, the earth didn't stop. There wasn't a virgin birth. All of these things. In our society, we accept this nonsense and we agree not to talk about it as if it's nonsense. And doing that, I do think, makes the world more safe for fundamentalists.
That is a coherent position. If you believe it's nonsense, then of course anyone who believes in that nonsense is culpable for it.
That's right. But once again, I think, and actually Lawrence did a very good job there of differentiating between faith and religion. In fact, he said we believe 10 ridiculous things before breakfast. One of them being is I love my wife. That's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Faith is the same exact emotion.
I happen to love my wife in case she's watching.
Everything's fine.
We all love our wives.
Everything's fine, honey.
Yeah. I'm going to bring it back to the subject. I'm going to bring up a subject and ask you first of all, Reza, on the subject of fundamentalism. The religion these days most associated with fundamentalism is Islam, rightly or wrongly, in terms of what's going on in the Middle East, in terms of terrorist attacks, in terms of issues of gender, etc., etc. Do you accept that the religion of Islam, out of all the religions right now being debated in the world or covered, is the religion that most people are most worried about, and people are kind of right to worry about it because it is intruding into everyday life in a way that other religions perhaps aren't?
I think that most definitely people should be worried about religious acts of violence, because religion does lend itself to those kinds of acts, as does any other ideology. But if you're going to blame religion for acts of violence in religion's name, then you have to be willing to blame nationalism for fascism. You have to be willing to blame socialism for communism. These are simply man-made. These are man-made ideologies.
I think you're making.
Please let me.
Well, they're all man-made ideologies.
Please, one moment. These are all man-made ideologies, all of them predicated on absolutism of one sort or another. And any kind of absolutism is a dangerous ideology, and it can be used for good and for bad.
Before I go to Lawrence to respond to that point, just on, so do you accept that do you think that people are right to put Islam at the top of that list of ideologies to be worried about?
Right. So what you're asking is there something exceptional about Islam that makes it more likely
in the current era?
In the current era? Yeah. I mean, I think that it's certainly true. I think it's certainly true that when one looks at large parts of the Middle East, what you are seeing is Muslims engaged in acts of violence and conflict. That's absolutely true. But whether that means that there is something inherent within Islam, its texts, or its ideology that lends itself to that violence more so than, say, Judaism or Buddhism or Hinduism is false simply by the fact that we have Buddhist violence and Christian violence and Jewish violence.
Lawrence, let me jump in finally. Okay, look, I think the point is that, and there's some of what Reza said is accurate. I think that.
Oh well, thank you, Lawrence.
Some small percentage. The point is that there's lots of religious violence, and I don't think, and I am not. I don't define myself as a theologian, although I've read all the scriptures of both books. I think the Old Testament is full of violence and just as miserable as the Quran is. I think I said in this program before, they're all equally violent and miserable if you actually read the scriptures. They're not guides for good living. But the real concern, I think, is that for one reason or another, and I think it's just historical, the Quran is taken by many Muslims to be literal, to be sacred, to be not touchable. The Bible isn't anymore. My big problem with Islam right now is that people take the Quran as if it is meaningful, worthwhile document, and it's no more meaningful or worthwhile than the Bible. And I think many Christians and Jews now say, you know what, I'm a Christian or Jew, but I look at the Bible and I say I pick and choose what I like.
It's a very fair point.
No, it's not a fair point.
It's not a fair point. You can say why it's unfair in a moment.
It's an amateur theologian's point of view.
Before you make that point, before you say why it's an amateur point, I think it's a fair point. I'm going to ask Lawrence this question. Deal with the earlier Reza point, which is that you can't just blame religions for war. Man goes to war for all sorts of ideologies, and you pick unfairly on religion.
Of course.
World War I, World War II, the Cold War. None of that had anything to do with religion.
Look, I mean, religion is a huge force in our society, and it's a contributor to many things. There are many other forces. There's economic inequities. There's history. There's ideology, as you point out. Religion has played a role, and in various times in human history, a role either initiating or justifying violence. But I think the bottom line is that religion, if anything, is an outgrowth of something that is, I think, evolutionary basis, which is xenophobia. Religion is based on in-groups and out-groups. And I'm not talking about faith now, I'm talking about religion.
Agreed.
Religion is us versus them. And it's been very effective from a tribal perspective of bringing groups together and keeping their tribe together. And I think that's probably part of the evolutionary basis of religion.
Religion is first and foremost a matter of identity, not a matter of beliefs.
So that's what you agree on. What do you
that's
disagree on versus the Quran being a book that's viewed as an infallible text in a way the Bible isn't today?
Well, so Lawrence said, he admits that he's not a theologian, but he's read scriptures. I'm not a cosmologist, but I've looked at the stars. But I will say that...
That's a very different thing.
But I will say this. I think you do not, first and foremost, need to go back 600 years to talk about Christian violence, okay? We have Robert Deere shot up a Planned Parenthood because he said Jesus told him to do so.
Or justifying slavery in the United States. Justifying slavery. Religion was used for that.
Though religion religion was also
absolutely.
used in order to free slaves. So
I
that's
think-
exactly the point that I'm making.
Hold on, I think we all agree.
The issue here is
the religion can be used. Different religions can be used to justify.
Lawrence's
specific point is
right,
that why Islam is a special
exceptional.
case because of the role that texture and literalism and infallibility plays.
Right, and again, I think that's a very, and I'm not using amateurish in a derogatory way here, but it is an amateur view of what's happening with religion and what's happening in the world right now. Every religion, every text has verses that promulgate peace and love and compassion, and verses that promulgate violence and destruction. That's the whole thing about religious scripture, is that it's infinitely malleable. I understand why a lot of Americans, particularly liberal, educated Americans, would say, well, Christians read their scriptures differently because I feel that's the case because of what I see in the media. But it's not true. The truth of the matter is that how you read a scripture has everything to do with who you are and very little to do with the scripture itself.
Lawrence, let me ask you this question.
Well, no, but
very
there's
briefly,
studies that show that Muslims simply don't believe the doctrines of the religion, and that I don't think those studies are the same in Islam. But what
you
were you
also
going to
live
ask?
in a country, Lawrence, you also live in the United States, where there are a lot of Christian literalists who did help elect the president of the United
absolutely.
States. There wouldn't be a president of the United States without those Christian evangelicals. But we're running out of time.
Which shows that they don't. By the way, which shows they don't believe in the scriptures, because if they did, they wouldn't have elected Donald Trump.
Okay.
But yeah, go on.
Reza, you're clearly someone who has no problem signing up for what modern science believes about evolution.
Absolutely
about
not.
all sorts of other controversial issues. But the reality is that a lot of religious believers don't sign up to things like evolution, don't have a problem with a lot of core tenets of modern scientific theory. How do you resolve that issue? We hear a lot about science versus religion.
I don't resolve it. And people believe what they want to believe. People
but that's not necessarily a good thing.
They can believe.
That's not necessarily a good thing.
Yes, but
if an entire generation of people bring up their kids to believe anti-scientific things, that's not in the name of religion. That's not a good thing. You wouldn't be pro that, are you?
Absolutely. Look, believing anti-scientific things, I think, is incorrect.
Which is a reality in the religious world.
But the thing, yes, it is a reality in the religious world, but it's not the reality in the religious world. Most Americans believe America is the greatest country in the world. It's not.
Look,
that's just a false belief.
It's what they
against
do that
science.
counts.
But what I would say is this. I think what we need to do is provide greater religious literacy, greater education about the religions of the world, about the way that religion is a historical and phenomenological thing to discuss and experience. We also need to have conversations that separate religious belief from just faith in itself. Lawrence is right that religious identification is on the decline, but you know what is not on the decline is actually belief in God. Spiritualism is not in decline. Religious identification is.
I agree with you about literacy. I think literacy is a great thing. We should all be literate about many more things. I'm much more concerned about scientific literacy.
Let me ask you this. Do you agree with Reza on the spiritual point? Reza made a point that, that belief is not going down. Because it's interesting, because you mentioned polling earlier. I do want to end this by asking, which of you is on the right side of history, regardless of whether God exists or not?
Well,
the way humanity is going.
Spirituality. You know what? I love the spirituality of science because that has one significant advantage. It's real. And so when I look at a Hubble Space Telescope picture, I experience awe and wonder about the real universe. I hear people tell me, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. And usually that means that they haven't thought about the issue.
And I think the important thing is for you to essentially figure out a way to reconcile what you see as real with your subjective experience of what that real thing is. And so again, what we are talking
I love being
about,
wrong. That's why I'm a scientist.
No, but
I love being
as
the
an
universe
atheist,
proving me wrong.
Hold on, as an atheist, you never said I don't know whether there is a God or not. You said there is no God because there's no evidence for it. An atheist
I said there's no evidence.
Yes, an agnostic says
there's no evidence.
An agnostic says I don't know.
I don't want to end the show on what's an atheist or agnostic. I do want to end the show by asking you to look in your crystal balls.
I can't claim there isn't divine purpose to.
Well,
I've never
ask you
claimed
to
that
look
I
in your
can say
crystal
there's not
balls.
divine purpose.
Fair enough. Let me ask you both to look in your crystal balls and say this. 10, 20, 30 years from now, are we going to have fewer believers in the world? Do we think belief is on a downward trajectory? Do we think religion is, quote unquote, dying out? Are we outgrowing it or not?
No, we're not outgrowing faith. We're not outgrowing belief. Because here's the thing, is I think a lot of people, and perhaps Lawrence is one of them, seems to believe that science can replace faith. That if we can prove certain things, then people will stop believing in them. But the fact of the matter is that religion has always been in a state of evolution. When we discovered that the earth was not the center of the universe, Christianity didn't go away. It just absorbed that information and continued. If aliens suddenly appear right now in front of us, and say, hello, we're from another planet, planet, it's not like religion will simply go away. We'll accept that knowledge and we'll move on.
Last word to you, Lawrence.
Okay, well, first of all, I generally don't make predictions about anything less than 2 trillion years in the future for many reasons, not least because none of us will be around to talk about it. So I don't claim to have a crystal ball, but I think that one thing is true. Religion has been ubiquitous part of human history. It's not going to go away easily. But another thing is true is that the more scientific literacy there is, the less of the intellectual basis will be there to support religion, and we'll see more and more people finding other ways to add meaning and purpose to their lives. They'll create it. Right. They'll find spirituality and reality, and I think that is a good thing.
Right.
But I don't think religion is easily going to go away. It's been around for as long as humanity has been writing.
I think scientific knowledge is going to change religion.
I had the last word. I had the last word.
Scientific knowledge is going to change religion. It's going to alter religious people, but it won't make it go away.
Lawrence Krauss, Reza Aslan, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you both for coming on this special edition of UpFront. That's our show. UpFront will be back next week.